All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, with migrant numbers significantly on the rise, once again, our nation's media has gone all in on what is happening right now at the U.S. southern border. Right-wing media is addicted to this crisis because they're Biden's a socialist and Dr. Seuss content is running a bit thin. Mainstream outlets are addicted to it because Trump is gone, the January 6th riots are fading, and they are in desperate need of something, anything, to mitigate the utter and complete ratings collapse. So it was no surprise when at Biden's very first press conference, the overwhelming bulk of the questions concerned what was happening at the border. Now, I'm not saying it's not an important issue. How we treat migrants seeking asylum is a critical humanitarian story. It's an important value story about the guy who says he's restoring the soul of the nation. It's also an important competence story about just being able to logistically manage the increased flow of both adults and significantly children. But as per usual, U.S. media is completely missing the point and the big picture to the benefit of many people in power, including Joe Biden. No right-wing media. Trump was not actually doing an amazing job on the border. His cruelty was nothing to be proud of, and migrant numbers were on the rise under his administration, too. You just didn't care that much then. And no liberal media. The real problem isn't that Biden's just such a nice guy. The actual problem is that over decades, U.S. foreign policy and domestic drug policy have combined to help make key Central American countries virtually unlivable, beset by violence, corruption, and economic collapse, all of which we had a key hand in. So just consider this. 2/3 of the children who are arriving at our southern border are coming from 3 relatively small countries. That would be Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Now, these nations were treated as playgrounds by the CIA for decades, complete with coups, American-funded death squads, and millions upon millions in funding and training for police states. Anything and everything was justified to defeat the commies and protect global financial interests. Just take a look at the history of Guatemala and the United Fruit Company if you need a little bit of a refresher on that history. Now, that's to say nothing of the utter failure of our supply-side-only war on drugs, which has fueled massive gang violence and government corruption. So we install right-wing governments and we enforce market fundamentalist policies leading to skyrocketing inequality and desperation. Then we enforce a prohibition drug policy that creates a massive, violent, unregulated drug market. And you end up with a situation where many poor people have no choice but to participate in this brutal, horrific, and dangerous business or be murdered if they don't. We helped render their economies and political systems dysfunctional. Then we create a massive demand for illegal drugs. And then we pretend we're solving the problem by funding brutal crackdowns on that drug production. Crackdowns, by the way, that have never, for one split second, actually slowed the supply of drugs. Now, Biden himself has a long history as a drug warrior, a legacy which he continues to this day, from firing staffers who self-reported marijuana use, a drug, by the way, that is legal in the District of Columbia and which was used not only by Barack Obama, but by the current vice president. More significantly, he's amped up pressure on the Colombian government to mass spray Roundup over fields in that country in hopes of killing coca crops. Not only does Roundup appear to be a carcinogen, but this policy has been used over decades and just doesn't work. Biden should know this well because it was an integral element in something called Plan Colombia, which he led the charge on. So Plan Colombia provided mass infusions of government cash, American cash, into government security forces, leading to violent crackdowns. But it also critically protected American financial interests. If the goal of Plan Colombia was to crack down on drug production, it failed. And if the goal was reducing violence, it also failed. According to The Intercept, after the implementation of the plan, cocaine flowed northward at higher rates and lower prices than ever before. The other clear result was an increase in violence. Between 2003 and 2007, the Colombian army, funded and emboldened by the United States, killed thousands of civilians and falsely claimed there were guerrilla soldiers killed in combat in what became known as the false positive scandal. During the same period, as John Lindsay Poland, author of Plan Colombia, explained, more than 7 million Colombians were displaced by the armed conflict. But Plan Colombia served the interests of global capital, so it became the model for the much-touted Obama-era policy for the Northern Triangle countries. As Stephen Cohen wrote at The Baffler, Plan Colombia buttressed the Washington consensus: free trade, financialization, deregulation, structural adjustment, etc. When the pink tide of leftist governance swept South America, providing the architecture for U.S. statecraft under neoliberalism, the new Obama policy towards the Northern Triangle countries, modeled on Plan Colombia, was led by Biden too, and obviously hasn't borne much fruit since we're right back where we started, only this time with higher numbers of asylum seekers. Now, we can debate the nitty-gritty of the tactical moves being made right now by the Biden administration, the conditions in which children are being held, whether it's even legal to deny temporary entry to adults seeking asylum with no hearing whatsoever, all of which are actually really important. And I'll go ahead and piss everyone off by saying that on these discrete tactical questions, I actually think the Biden administration is doing an okay job of balancing incredibly different questions of security and humanity. But the lack of curiosity about the bigger picture from the press and the manifest failures of the Biden way of approaching Latin America, from the war on drugs to the Colombia plan to his efforts under the Obama administration, that means that whatever band-aids might be put on the situation right now, we will be right back here, right back in this same place over and over and over again, watching demagogues score political points on the backs of human misery, while our political class remains complicit in the very factors that are driving the surge. Not to mention using this human suffering and desperation to gin up ratings and cover for other political failures. Can't possibly admit that we face this crisis because of the consensus of decades of politicians along with a complicit media. Better to debate whether kids in cages are still kids in cages and whether Joe Biden is suffering from being just such a nice guy. And Sagar, it's very hard to find anyone who's honest, any honest reporters about immigration, both what's happening now, what the trade-offs are, what the realities are, what the complexities are, and most importantly, and this is the part that they just completely blind spot, how you get to this situation to start with, and that our hands are far from clean in the situation.
The media used these children as pawns from the very beginning. They never actually cared about them. I covered this a lot back in 2018, because right now, not only are they shutting up about what's happening down at the border, but they never really cared. I mean, a lot of these people and children were raped and sexually molested on the journey. Nothing. Whenever it came to reporting on that. And then in terms of the conditions on what's happening on the ground, it's like a complete silence. Like you said, they're coming because you're a nice guy. And I'm glad you did this radar, because the only important thing to ask is, why is this happening? Now, I think this is happening. Now, look, United Fruit Company, all that, certainly true. That also was like 100 years ago. So what I would say is the reason that all these people are coming here is because they're really poor. And if you go and you survey them and you ask them, like, why are you coming here? Economic migration. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't blame them. If I lived in a poor country, I would want to come here too. So the question is, why now? And I think the real answer to that is a change in American policy somewhere around 2014, largely with the institution of DACA. Now, whether you think of DACA or not, doesn't matter, whether it was a good policy. What happened is that it sent a magnet for basically children all across Central America who said, if we get there before we're 18 and our parents get there, then they can catch and release. Number one, you can get an economic visa where you can actually still work. 3, you're never actually really going to be deported. And 4, that you can come here and hope on the next amnesty. Now, you can disagree or agree with any of that. I'm just saying I think that's what the poll is. And that's why nobody wants to solve this crisis. Republicans had a chance in 2018. They had unified government, and they wouldn't pass anything. Nothing. You know why? I think people secretly love having this. I think the Democrats love it too. And I think it's disgraceful because it's terrible for many of the people who are coming here because they're low-wage workers. It's terrible, in my opinion, for many American citizens, and it's lawless. And people are being subjected to criminal treatment all across the border. The only question is, what do you do? I think you need to reform U.S. asylum law, which makes it so that, and look, yes, all these countries are very violent, but the truth is their murder rate has actually gone down in the last several years. So yeah, I mean, they can claim they're fleeing domestic violence, and I definitely sympathize, but by the standard of letting in anybody who comes from a violent country, that's like 1.3 billion people.
So here's the thing. You and I widely disagree on this.
Sure.
So they're coming for a simple reason. Their countries are screwed up. And a large part of the reason that they're screwed up is because of us. But these are countries that are close to us. And by the way, yes, violence has decreased. These are still some of the most violent countries in the entire world with the highest murder rates. And the reason they have that is because our dumbass war on drugs and the prohibition policy that creates lawlessness, creates corruption, creates this massive black market, fuels the violence, and makes it so that a combination of our trade policies, our CIA interventions and coups in these countries with the black market of the drug market, and then you throw on top of that the coronavirus crisis. You ask why now? Yeah. That's the biggest reason why right now people are coming. But I also just fundamentally disagree with this idea that Look, I think we have an obligation to take care of our own people first. I do believe that, and I also do believe that we should know who is coming into our country, and I don't think you should just have totally open borders. I think we need to know who's coming in all of this. But this is this whole scarcity mentality that, oh, we don't have enough room, we don't have resources, we don't have enough space. And it pits working class people against each other. I just think it's fundamentally bullshit. So even this idea, yes, there is an acute crisis on the border right now of just the number of people coming and being able to deal with that in a way that keeps our people safe, protects the people also who are coming here. But no one wants to deal with the bigger issues of why these countries are so screwed up in the first place and how we have such complicity in ultimately doing that. Biden loves to tout his Northern Triangle policy during the Obama administration. Right, and all the neoliberals, even people like Julian Castro, have jumped on board with this, like this was some amazing thing. Oh, this is providing them aid, et cetera, et cetera. It mostly just funded a massive security crackdown. That's what it really was. It was like, let's amp up your police state. That's what the money really went to. And look, there may be a role for some increased security in these states. I'm not saying that that's not reasonable, but that just the crackdown in the police state is never, ever going to solve your problem. And you see that with the track record over decades, starting in Colombia and then what was exported to these other countries. The real thing that the U.S. government has only cared about in these countries ever was protecting the American financial business interests. That has always been the common theme. That has always been what they come back to. And I think you're 100% right. Republicans, they are so excited this is happening right now. Fox News is delighted that they could run to the border and put these pictures on TV. They don't give a shit about these people. And you're right. Democrats, same thing. They love to use this issue for their own political gain, and they don't do anything to really change or solve the problem either. And it becomes this disgusting morass where absolutely no one is honest about it.
Well, the conversation we're having right now, you're just never going to see anywhere else. And that's what really bothers me about it, which is, look, I actually disagree whenever it comes to what the problems in these countries are. And same on the standard. I mean, by the standard, like everybody in Iraq has a better right to come to the United States than people in Guatemala. And so the question is, it's like, there's 1 billion people who live in screwed up countries. It's just simply like, it's not a tenable situation to say they all qualify for asylum just because some people can walk here and some people live 10,000 miles away. But again, this is a reasonable conversation. You can say, what had happened in these Northern Triangle countries? Is it all U.S. policy? I think people conveniently ignore that Panama and Costa Rica, which are both right next to those countries, are thriving democracies with a decent amount of security and lack of drug trade. There is an onus whenever it comes to this upon the people themselves whenever they live down there. It's not just all the United States. I think that's a very Howard Zinn way of looking at the world. Are we complicit in a lot of bad activity in South America? 100%. We literally started wars in order to create Panama, all of that, etc. No apologism for U.S. imperialism in the 1890s. But we live in 2021. So what do you do now?
This is not just the 1890s. This is also through the Reagan administration, continuing through the 90s.
Yeah, but Nicaraguans are coming. It's not like Sandinistas are coming.
Sure, but listen, I think that piece of this is always ignored when we're talking about why those countries are as screwed up as they ultimately are. And I would also say, and this isn't this is another piece of this conversation, but you know, when it's Cubans who are coming here, there isn't this oh my God, Cubans are good. There's no panic about that whatsoever.
Bullshit. It is
because
bullshit.
they are asylum seekers who are politically convenient for regimes in power here, mostly, Republicans, but also Democrats too. It's viewed completely differently because they are a politically convenient group of asylum seekers.
I 100% agree. It drives me crazy whenever I see, it's like, and now that many people in the Miami community are then talking about like, no, we can't have these Northern Triangle people come here.
Right.
Which always just exposes like the pure, like if you really want to reduce everything to identitarianism, it becomes ridiculous. That's the worst part. Everybody uses these people as pawns. Everyone. Nobody actually wants to make their lives better or anything like that. And the real question is how do we make it work for all of us? And I just don't think anybody's really interested in that conversation, which is what screws a lot of people over.
Agreed. All right, Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.